Good evening. It's extremely nice to be here. So this is my book, The Last Act of Love. I thought I would start off by telling you that I didn't want to write this book at all. I wanted to write books. I wanted to write books for, as soon as I knew that a book existed and what it was, I wanted to write books. I wanted to write novels. I wanted to write smart, sophisticated books about made-up people, possibly having adultery and telling jokes. This is my first book, and it's a memoir, and I'm going to tell you about why I ended up writing this book. The people on the cover of the book are me, the girl, and my brother Matthew, who's the boy. That's also us. That's also us. That's also us. And that's him. Now, because you're all smart people, and because Rosie's told you, you probably know that the reason why we show people pictures of children is that something bad is about to happen to them. So I'm going to tell you part of the story about what happened. And to do that, I have to ask you to come with me to Yorkshire in 1990. Probably be a harder task for some of you than for others, because some of you might remember it quite well. So in 1990, I was 17, and my brother Matthew was 16. He was 13 months younger than me, and he was 9 inches taller than me. I was fairly fiercely proud of him, and he reciprocated this affection in a more sort of casual, less emphatic way. But he did reciprocate it. The running joke in our family was that I had inherited all my father's Irish, outlandish, emotional, wear our hearts on our sleeves, laughing and crying at the drop of a hat, emoting all over the place way of carrying on. And he had inherited our mother's Anglo-Saxon calm, and he was rational and logical. He was science, and I was art. I was studying English, theatre studies, and French at A-level. I was reading novels in French. I wanted to go and live in Paris in an attic. He was about to start studying maths and physics and chemistry. His favourite subject of the time, I think, was statistics. A story that I think says a lot about us both was that I once made him watch a film with me that was about the French resistance, and obviously it was very sad. Lots of people died. I cried my way through it, and he didn't. And at the end I said to him, "How could you not cry at that?" And he said, "I could never cry at something that was made up." And then I told him that it wasn't made up, it was based on a true story. And he said, if I'd known that, I may have cried. I'm enjoying being in this moment. So also, life is very good for our family. So my dad, as an Irishman, hadn't always been having a great time in England. He spent most of the 70s getting arrested. But by 1990, everybody loves the Irish. We own a pub in Yorkshire. If you've never lived in a pub in Yorkshire that your parents own when you're 17, I can tell you that it is great. We're a bit full of ourselves, we're precocious, we're grown up, we think we're amazing, but you know what, quite a lot of other people do too. So life is very good. Then, and I never like this bit, I hate this bit during any event, I just want to kind of carry on. I could tell you loads about 1990 and why I was interested. But then, one Saturday night, we've worked in the pub that our parents own, and part of our deal for that is that after, as well as getting paid afterwards, our mother will give us and whoever else has worked a lift down the road to a place called the Rainbow. It's a pool hall and it has a disco. So we do that. After about half an hour, one of our customers asks me if I want a lift home, and I say yes. I go and find my brother to ask him if he wants to come with me. He says, "No," he says, "I'll hang around here. I might get lucky." So I throw him a sort of a... I forgot to check if I can swear. Am I allowed to swear? Yeah. Brilliant. Because it'd be a problem for the rest if I can't. So I throw him a sort of a "what an arrogant fuck you are" eyebrow raise, and I walk out of the Rainbow. About an hour later, I'm kneeling next to him in the road. He's been knocked over by a car. The car behind him stopped, called an ambulance from the phone box in the village, and came onto the pub to find us. I'm kneeling next to him in the road. He's not conscious. I find the pulse on his wrist because I want to reassure myself that he's still alive. I absolutely know that everything has changed. All I can think about in this moment is that everything has changed. I go with him in the ambulance. I know how serious it is because the way the ambulance men are with each other. They say over the radio, we've got a bad one here. They tell me to keep talking to him, so I do. I sort of babble, chat to him about things. At Pontefract Hospital, he's stabilised. I call my parents. At Leeds General Infirmary, he's operated on. What feels like hours later, after lots of drinking tea in a small relative's room, the surgeon comes to see us. The surgeon says to my dad, I've saved your son's life. I don't know yet whether that was the right thing to do. He tells us that the first 48 hours are critical. I spend most of that time sitting next to my brother's bed in intensive care. I stay in the relative's overnight room. On my way there, I find the chapel. I'm an atheist, but I went to a Catholic school, so I know the prayers. So I sit in the chapel in the middle of the night, saying Hail Marys and promising that I would do anything if my brother could be kept alive. So far, so simple in a way. That, I think, is the grenade moment. I've come to see that there are these moments in people's lives, and I think of it as the grenade explodes into your life. 1 minute life is normal, next minute it's fucked. I was thinking over the weekend, I've never thought about it this way before, I was thinking of Paris. I was thinking of those individuals. No, I wasn't thinking of the political thing. I was thinking of all those individuals, all the parents of the people that were at that concert. And for the first time ever, I thought of this image. I thought, it's like a guillotine. The blade just goes down like that between life as it was and new life. The complex bit for us, though, was that all I knew when I was doing my atheist praying in the chapel, I thought that life was a matter of the one state of affairs or the other. I saw things in very binary terms, and I didn't realise that actually there is a huge of shades of grey between life and death, and that's what we were about to discover. About 2 weeks after Matthew's accident, he was still lying there with his eyes closed. He got the best GCSE results in his school, and so then in the papers he became coma boy. I note it now around exam times every year. There's always there's a person who's just passed maths A level even though they're 11. Another couple of stories of achievement, and then there's always someone who's been truncated, cut down between doing their exams and getting their exam results, and he became that story. And one of the newspapers reported that when my mother read him his exam results, he opened his eyes and smiled. That says a lot about our societal misunderstanding about brain damage and the ability that we have to be able to do anything about it. When I thought about writing this book, everything that I've told you so far doesn't actually particularly distress me to think about, because whilst at the time I thought that was the worst thing that had ever happened, what fills me with dread and I still find very difficult is actually, it's not that night, it's not that first bit, it's trying to track and trace the gradual erosion of hope. What turned us as a family who were intent to do everything to help this boy live, who genuinely believed that if we talked to him enough and loved him enough and made him a mixed tape enough times and played the guitar to him and brought his pets to see him and brought him home to our house and built a bungalow at the back of the pub where his garage used to be, where he used to do his science experiments. We thought that if we did all that, we could somehow reverse his catastrophic brain damage, and none of that turned out to be true. Instead, we gradually came to the realization over 8 years that he really shouldn't be alive in the first place and that he wouldn't want to be alive in the way that he is. And then when we made that decision, eventually, longly, painfully, agonizingly, over years, we then decided it was our responsibility to do something about it. So we went to the family court, and he became the 12th person in this country to die by withdrawal of nutrition and hydration. There was a legal end to his life. The only way to legally end somebody's life in this circumstance is that you take out their feeding tube and wait for them to die, and it took 13 days. And I often think about the day of the court case, because I probably on the day of the court case thought there wasn't much more shit to come. I thought we'd probably had quite a lot of that. And then I think, and the 13 days, which I do write about in my book, what I can remember of them, but I can't remember very much, and I assume that's just some protective mechanism, because I don't want to remember it. I understand, as I'm sure you do, that the legal reasoning behind that is that the withdrawal of treatment has to be a withdrawal rather than an intervention. So that's why it's not a morphine injection. And I imagine these rooms in which people sit and discuss the law, and they'll have conversations about how it couldn't be a morphine injection or some other way because that would set some sort of dangerous precedent. And I often think that I just think that if anybody in that room had to watch somebody die for 13 days, then they might find a way of overcoming that precedent. As I wrote the book, what I really realised was that this story isn't very much about us, in the way that a lot of books might be about something specific, but really they're about something universal. And I realised that actually what this book is about is that we've just reached a point in our history, the history of human race, when we're able to keep people alive when they shouldn't be. And that we haven't morally, ethically, legally, or emotionally caught up with what we're technically capable of doing, which is to prolong life. And that, thank you. And that is what my book is about. My book doesn't end with the death of my brother. I carry on because I realised as well, really what I am is I'm a case study. I'm a case study on what happens to someone when you make them witness that. And I go into quite a lot of detail about the depression and the anxiety attacks and the panic and the ability to carry on living when something so desperately cruel happened to my brother. It's a strange and beautiful thing having a book in the world. And one of the things I really like is hearing from other people. I understand sibling loss, like I didn't do even when I wrote the book because of other people speaking to me. I understand survivor's guilt. I'd never clocked, actually, that was a lot of what was going on with me. And it's by hearing from other siblings that I've been able to realise that part of that, that's part of my problem. I feel essentially a little bit guilty to be alive. The other thing I really like getting is I get letters from people whose relatives are in a persistent vegetative state. The letters that make me saddest is where their relatives are still alive. If their relatives are dead, they thank me for showing them that they're not alone, and they tell me that they may too be able to feel less guilty in the future. If their relatives are still alive, they're often asking for practical help, and because I met people in the course of writing my book, I'm sometimes able to point them in the right direction. It seems to me that it's just such an absolute awful, it's a profoundly psychologically and philosophically difficult to be with the body of the person you love most, but who is somehow possibly still alive in a deteriorating body. The question that always stumps me a bit is people ask me, or they tell me, they say, he would be so proud of you. I have to do so much metaphysical wrangling with that notion. I don't really know where he is being proud of me. I still, as ever, one of the consequences of what happened to him is that nothing that happens to me ever seems remarkable, because how could it? How could it compare? And I just couldn't twist my head around this for ages. And I also thought, again, if you remember back to the emotions and the science and all that, all these people saying my book was so heartbreaking, they stayed up all night reading it, they're in floods of tears. I could imagine him saying, like, what the fuck is with all the crying? And then when Henry Marsh, who's a very brilliant neurosurgeon, reviewed my book and contextualized what I'd written about us within his professional experience, I thought, actually, I can imagine Matty being quite chuffed with that. And I can sort of imagine him saying, finally, word girl, finally you've clocked what the words are all about. You're supposed to be using them so that you might do some bit of good, so fewer other poor fuckers have to lie around like I did for 8 years before being allowed to die. And that's what I think would have impressed him. I think he would be quite impressed that I'm here in this room, especially that there are loads of men who do science and sums in it. And I think he would quite like that. And I think that I had to write this book because I needed to own this story. So whilst I didn't want to write the book, I realised that was because I just still don't want this to happen. I don't want this grenade to have happened. I still don't want this guillotine to have happened. I'm sure part of my problem with this is not a sense, it's because of the prolonged nature. It's because of the 8 years that were there between the night when I think his life was over and the night when he eventually died. And I think the damage that is done to you to have to desire somebody's death and then work to bring it about and sign papers to bring it about and then sit and watch it happen is quite a profound thing, which I think should happen less. But I think that the last thing I would say, that the expression, the last act of love, comes from my mother's affidavit, which is in the book, about how it was our last act of love for Matty to bring him to his death. But lately, I have been thinking that maybe the last act of love that we do for anybody that leaves us in this life is to try to work out how to live well. Thank you.